Good morning. In just a few minutes, we are going to be participating, not just partaking in the Lord's Supper, both in class and in our songs so far this morning. We have used the term salvation. How do we get salvation? Through whom do we have salvation? The answer is Christ, and we are here to remember him the way he asked us to remember him, by our participation in the Lord's Supper. So I want to make a few comments, some of them just to open this up a little bit. I had breakfast with 4 of you yesterday. Then we also saw a car show, but we had some breakfast first. And I said something to the effect that, I'm working on my comments for Sunday morning, and I have 2 versions. One of them, I'm working on this, and the other, I've expanded to this. I'm not going to use either one, so we could just discard those. But I do have the compromise between, okay? I might ask for a show of hands here. How many of you get upset with distracted drivers? How many of you at some point in life have been told, you need to pay attention? Yeah, we do. We do need to pay attention. I was telling Mickey and Gary before our class this morning that, I grew up in West Virginia, and there was a certain group of preachers who came through periodically, I guess at the invitation of the leadership of the congregations where we worshiped. But there were some regulars. Fred Dennis was one of them, and we have somebody who believes she was baptized by Fred Dennis at one point. I met him much later in life. She does have a few years on many of us. But there was another one whose name was, all we ever knew were his initials, R.W. R.W. Gann. And one thing I remember about being in assemblies where he was preaching was that he would say periodically and often during a sermon, he would say with a little increase to his voice, "Are you listening? Pay attention." He would do that. Those were the days when we had 2-week-long, I call them series of lessons. The terminology at the time and still here today is gospel meetings. But we had the 2-week-long ones. And you can imagine that R.W. would frequently be saying, "Are you listening? Pay attention." There's something described in the Bible that we need to pay attention to. I'd like you to just, maybe this afternoon, read the book of Hebrews. I'm going to pull a few verses from there, because what we are told in the book of Hebrews is that one thing we must pay attention to is our salvation. Our salvation comes only through Christ. The book of Hebrews opens with a comparison in the first chapter that Christ is superior to the angels. There was no angel who could have been tasked with working out, being the sacrifice for our salvation. Everybody's clear on that, right? A little more participation here. Head nods would be good. Nobody but Christ. Nobody but Christ. And then he moves on, after making that case and mentioning salvation, in the second chapter, he begins with comments about pay attention. we must give more earnest heed to, lest at any time we let them slip. We've got to be careful about the attention we pay to the Word of God, because our salvation and how we remember it and pay attention to it depends on it. We must be careful with this. We can move on to chapter 5, and you see that where the writer is talking about Christ's superiority again, about his preeminence. He's talking about the high priests, and he says something to the effect that, Jesus is the source of salvation to all who obey him. So when, in a few minutes, we participate in the Lord's Supper, remember what it's all about. It's about our having life eternal through him. Chapter 9, similar comments. He was offered once for the sins of many. All those other sacrifices could not do that. But Christ's crucifixion was a sacrifice for many. So, getting into this a little bit further, one of the things I've been having go through my mind and wondering about here, how seriously do we take our salvation? John 3:16 tells us that God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. That sounds to me like God is concerned, very concerned, about our salvation. Head nods. Agree? We just sang a song, and we can read, we should read, Jesus died for us. Sounds to me like Jesus is concerned about our salvation. Thank you. Getting head nods. Thank you. How concerned are we? Are you listening? Pay attention. Are we as concerned about our salvation as God the Father and as Jesus? I have to think about myself at times, and I said, whew, boy, they did this. What have I done? What am I doing? Jesus asked us to remember him through our participation in the Lord's Supper. And that's what we're going to do here in just a few minutes. Got one other thing I'm going to read before I step down. But I'm asking each of us, after we participate in the Lord's Supper, after we leave this building today, think about how seriously are we taking heed to our salvation for which Christ died? I don't know. For any who really want to follow along, you'll recognize some words from our songbook. I've changed them just a little bit to make them maybe read a little easier. But I'm going to read one of our hymns. We're not worrying about parts and notes and so on. I just want you to catch the words and listen. It's written from the perspective of Jesus asking a question, making some statements and asking a question. And when I finish this, One other comment I have to make about participation in the Lord's Supper, because to me sometimes it becomes a distraction, and if it may to others as well, let's prevent it today. When the prayers are given for the elements of the Lord's Supper, do you know what the Bible examples are? They gave thanks for those elements. Yes, we're thankful for the body and blood of Christ. But twice, at least twice, we are told he gave thanks for the bread, for the cup. Let us not neglect that. I'm going to read a hymn for you. I gave my life for you. I shed my blood, that you could ransomed be and quickened from the dead. I gave my life for you. What have you given for me? Anything? I left my Father's house of light and that glory-circled throne. I left it for earthly night and wandered sad and lone. I left it all for you. Have you left anything for me? And I've brought to you down from that home above salvation full and free. I've brought you pardon and love. I bring rich gifts to you. What have you brought to me? Let's participate in the Lord's Supper. Let's be aware of how blessed we are. And let's remember Christ as he said, "This do in remembrance of me."